On the frigid morning of November 12th, 2023, the silence of the fourth floor of the Crimson Lofts apartment building was broken by a single, insistent sound. It was the unanswered chime of a cell phone, a cheerful, upbeat ringtone that felt obscene in the sterile quiet of the hallway. Two uniformed officers stood outside apartment 4B, their presence a stark anomaly in the trendy, overpriced building, primarily occupied by students and young professionals. They had been called for a wellness check. Imani Williams had not answered her mother's calls for 3 days. It was not like her. At 18, she was meticulous, responsible, and in constant, loving contact with the family she had left behind in Georgia to attend the prestigious Northwood University on a hard-won scholarship. Her mother, frantic with a worry that transcended distance, had finally called the campus police, who had in turn dispatched a patrol car to Imani's off-campus residence. The building manager, a harried man named Gene, fumbled with a master key. He muttered apologies, explaining that Imani was a model tenant, quiet and always paid her rent on time. He inserted the key, turned the lock, and pushed the door inward. What they found inside would not just confirm a mother's worst fears, but would unspool a thread of calculated evil, so patient and so pervasive that it would challenge the very foundations of how the city's police force understood the nature of predation. The apartment was pristine, but it was the pristine emptiness of a place scrubbed of life itself. To understand how Imani Williams came to vanish from her own life, you have to go back 3 months to a sweltering August evening. Imani had arrived in the city with 2 oversized suitcases, a backpack filled with textbooks, and a heart brimming with a potent mixture of terror and exhilaration. She was the first in her family to attend a university out of state, the pride of her parents, and the envy of her younger siblings. Her vulnerability was not one of weakness but of circumstance. She was bright, she was capable, but she was also financially strained. Her scholarship covered tuition, but the city's cost of living was a crushing weight. She worked 20 hours a week at the campus library, a job that barely covered her groceries and utilities, leaving nothing for the social life that blossomed so easily for her wealthier classmates. More than the financial pressure, however, was the profound loneliness. She was a small-town girl, adrift in a sprawling, indifferent metropolis. The faces she passed on the street were a blur of fleeting glances. The friendships she tried to form felt superficial, tethered to lecture halls and study groups, but dissolving the moment classes ended. She ate most of her meals, alone in her small, sparsely furnished dorm room, the silence amplifying the distance between who she was and who she desperately wanted to become. Her dream was to be a journalist, to give voice to the voiceless. She was driven by a fierce sense of justice and a deep well of empathy. It was this empathy, this innate desire to see the good in people, that would become the very key a predator would use to unlock her world and systematically dismantle it. The encounter that changed everything happened on a Tuesday night in late September. It was just after 10 o'clock, and the 24-hour laundromat on the corner of Elm and 9th was nearly deserted. The air was thick with the scent of warm cotton and chemical detergent. The rhythmic tumbling of dryers was a hypnotic, lulling sound. Imani was there out of necessity. The dorm machines were all broken, and she had a job interview the next morning for a slightly better paying position at a local coffee shop. She needed her one good blouse to be clean. She was folding a set of sheets, her movements practiced and efficient, when she first noticed him. He was sitting on a hard plastic chair in the corner, partially obscured by a towering stack of outdated magazines. He looked out of place. His clothes, a frayed denim jacket and worn jeans, were clean but threadbare. His face was etched with a tiredness that seemed to go deeper than a lack of sleep, but his eyes, when they briefly met hers, were a startlingly clear blue. They held a spark of intelligence that contradicted his otherwise dishevelled appearance. He looked away quickly, as if embarrassed to have been caught staring. Imani felt a pang of sympathy. The city was full of people like him, people who had fallen through the cracks. She went back to her folding, determined to mind her own business. A few minutes later, she heard a soft shuffling sound. He was standing a few feet away, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He cleared his throat. He said his name was Julian Croft. He explained with a quiet, almost apologetic voice that his card had been declined by the machine. He had a load of wet clothes and was just a few quarters short. He was not aggressive. He was not demanding. His voice was gentle, educated even. He seemed more ashamed to be asking than anything else. Imani hesitated. Her budget was a tightrope walk every week, and every quarter counted. But then she looked at his face, at the genuine flicker of hope and desperation in his eyes. Her innate empathy won out. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small handful of coins, pressing them into his palm. A warm smile transformed his face, erasing some of the weariness. He thanked her profusely, telling her she had no idea what a lifesaver she was. He said that it was rare to find such kindness in the city. His words were a balm on her own loneliness. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen, not as a student or a library clerk, but as a person, a kind person. This was the first move in a game she did not know she was playing. The encounter was not chance, it was an audition. Julian Croft had been observing the laundromat for 2 nights, waiting for the right subject. He was a student of human nature, a predator who understood that the most effective lure is not a promise of wealth or passion, but the simple, profound gift of being understood. He started his laundry in the machine next to hers. He did not crowd her, but he began to talk. He shared a fabricated story of his own struggles, a tale perfectly tailored to her aspirations. He claimed he had once been a journalist himself, working overseas, but had fallen on hard times after a messy divorce and a professional betrayal. He spoke of wanting to write a book about the forgotten people of the city, the very people she dreamed of writing about. He created a false sense of connection, a shared purpose. He asked her about her studies, listening with an intensity that made her feel like the most interesting person in the world. He praised her ambition, telling her she had a rare fire that the world needed. For Imani, who felt anonymous and insignificant, this praise was intoxicating. She found herself opening up, sharing her dreams and her frustrations. When their clothes were dry, he helped her carry her heavy basket to the door. He didn't ask for her number directly. Instead, he made a more subtle request. He said he was trying to get back on his feet and would be grateful for any advice on navigating the university's resources. He wondered if he could buy her a coffee sometime, just to pick her brain. It was a masterful stroke, positioning her as the expert, the one with something to offer. It empowered her. She agreed. They exchanged numbers. As Imani walked back to her dorm that night, her laundry basket felt lighter. The city air felt less hostile. She felt a spark of excitement, the thrill of a new and unexpected connection. What she didn't know was that the connection was a carefully woven web, and she had just willingly taken the first step into its center. The next phase of the grooming began immediately. Julian texted her the following morning, not to ask for the coffee, but simply to thank her again for her kindness. His messages were frequent but never overwhelming. He sent her links to articles he thought she would find interesting, asked thoughtful questions about her classes, and offered words of encouragement before her exams. He was building trust brick by patient brick. He positioned himself as a mentor. He was always available, a steady and supportive presence in her digital life. When she despaired over a difficult assignment, he would talk her through it, offering insights that were surprisingly sharp and helpful. When she felt a wave of homesickness, he would share stories of his own travels, making the world seem both vast and conquerable. He was filling a void in her life she hadn't fully realized was there. They met for that coffee a week later. The transformation in his appearance was startling. He was clean-shaven, his hair was neatly cut, and he wore a simple but well-fitting blazer. He looked less like a man on the street and more like a visiting professor. He explained his appearance at the laundromat with a carefully crafted story. He said he had been in the middle of a deep-cover research project for his book, Living Among the Homeless, to truly understand their plight. The story was just plausible enough to be believed, and it appealed directly to her journalistic ideals. He told her he was an independent investor now, having made a small fortune in tech before his journalistic career. He claimed to live a simple life by choice, disillusioned with material wealth. This persona was perfect. It made him seem benevolent, wise, and above the petty concerns of money. It also provided a convenient explanation for any future displays of wealth. Over the next month, their bond deepened. He became her confidant. She told him things she didn't even tell her mother, about her anxieties, her financial worries, her feeling of being an imposter among her peers. He always listened without judgment, offering what seemed like sage advice. He was systematically mapping her vulnerabilities, learning the exact shape of her needs. He made her feel special, chosen. The first gift came in mid-October. Imani was lamenting the fact that her old laptop was on its last legs, constantly crashing in the middle of her writing assignments. The stress was keeping her up at night. 2 days later, a courier delivered a brand new, top-of-the-line laptop to her dorm. There was a simple note attached. A writer needs her tools. Consider it an investment in a brilliant future. Jay! Imani was stunned. She called him immediately, protesting that she couldn't possibly accept such an extravagant gift. His response was smooth and reassuring. He told her it was nothing to him, just a business expense. He was investing in her talent, he said, just as he would invest in a promising startup. He framed it not as a gift, but as a professional sponsorship. He made her feel that by accepting it, she was not taking charity, but entering into a serious, promising mentorship. This was a critical turning point. The gift dramatically improved her quality of life and her academic performance, but it also created a powerful, unspoken sense of obligation. She felt a surge of gratitude, so immense, it bordered on reverence. How could she ever repay such generosity? The answer, she would soon learn, was with her freedom. Shortly after, the second, much larger gift was presented. Julian learned that her dorm was loud, cramped, and a difficult environment for a serious student. He told her he owned several properties in the city as part of his investment portfolio. One of them, a beautiful one-bedroom apartment in the Crimson Lofts, was currently empty between tenants. He insisted she move in. He explained it in purely logical terms. He said she could live there rent-free for the school year, allowing her to quit her library job and focus entirely on her studies. He argued that her grades and her writing were the most important things, and he was simply removing the obstacles to her success. He told her, "Think of me as a patron, like the Medicis sponsoring artists. Your success is my return on investment." Her best friend from back home, a girl named Keisha, was the first to sound an alarm. When Imani called her, bubbling with excitement about the news, Keisha's reaction was one of pure skepticism. She asked who this man was, really. She questioned why a wealthy investor would take such a personal interest in a first-year student he'd met at a laundromat. "It sounds too good to be true, Imani," she had warned. "People don't just give away apartments." Imani had become defensive. She accused Keisha of being cynical, of not understanding the unique connection she had with Julian. She explained that he was a mentor, not a boyfriend. She insisted that their relationship was purely professional. She was so caught in the web of gratitude and flattery that she couldn't see the strands. Julian had already begun to isolate her, not by force, but by making her feel that her old connections just didn't understand her new, elevated life. She moved into the Crimson Lofts at the end of October. The apartment was beautiful, with floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, and a fully stocked kitchen. It was a world away from her cluttered dorm room. It felt like a dream. But the dream was a gilded cage, and the door had just locked behind her. Once she was physically isolated in the new apartment, the dynamic began to shift. The change was subtle at first. Julian gave her a new phone, explaining that it was for her security, and came with a prepaid international plan so she could call her family without worrying about the cost. It was another extravagant gift, framed as an act of care. In reality, the phone was preloaded with tracking software that monitored her location, her calls, and her messages. His mentorship took on a more controlling tone. He began to impose rules, all disguised as helpful advice. He suggested she dress in a more professional manner, buying her a new wardrobe of expensive, conservative clothing. He said it was about building her personal brand. He critiqued her friendships, subtly discouraging her from spending time with her college friends, whom he described as unserious distractions from her true potential. He began to use money as a tool for reward and punishment. If she followed his advice and spent her weekend studying, he would have an expensive dinner delivered to her apartment. If she mentioned wanting to go to a party, he would express his disappointment in her lack of focus, and his communication would become cold and distant for a day or two. She found herself constantly seeking his approval, her emotional states becoming inextricably linked to his. The true request, the moment the mask began to slip irrevocably, came in early November. He had been a perfect gentleman until then, never making a single romantic or physical advance. This had been a crucial part of his strategy, lulling her into a false sense of security. He invited her to a formal charity gala, an event he said was important for his business connections. He explained it was a perfect networking opportunity for her. He bought her a stunning evening gown. When he arrived at her apartment to pick her up, his charming facade was firmly in place. But in the car, his tone changed. He told her that his business partners at the event would assume they were a couple. He said that for the sake of appearances, it was important that they play the part. He asked her to be affectionate, to hold his hand, to laugh at his jokes. Imani felt a knot of unease tighten in her stomach. This crossed a line. She tried to protest, explaining that she wasn't comfortable with that. His reaction was not anger, but a display of deep, theatrical hurt. He didn't raise his voice. He simply sighed and said with a pained expression, "After everything I've done for you, Imani, I thought we had an understanding. I thought you were on my team." He was reminding her of her debt. The apartment, the laptop, the phone, the clothes. They were not gifts, they were transactions. The price was her compliance. The guilt was overwhelming. She felt ashamed for even questioning him. She reluctantly agreed, telling herself it was just for one night, just a small price to pay for the incredible opportunities he had given her. At the gala, he paraded her around like a trophy. He introduced her as his protégé, his brilliant discovery. But his hand on the small of her back felt proprietary, possessive. His smile, which had once seemed so warm, now looked like a mask. For the first time, she felt not gratitude, but fear. A cold, creeping fear that she was in far over her head. The fear solidified into a horrifying certainty 3 days before she disappeared. It happened by accident. Julian had come over to her apartment to drop off some books he thought she should read. He was in a hurry, taking a call from an overseas client. He left his briefcase behind on her coffee table. He called her a few minutes later, asking her to just leave it. He would pick it up the next day. Ordinarily, she wouldn't have dreamed of touching it, but something had shifted in her. The unease from the gala had festered. Keisha's warnings echoed in her head. A seed of suspicion had been planted, and it was beginning to sprout. With trembling hands, she unlatched the briefcase. Inside, beneath a stack of financial documents, was a slim, silver laptop she had never seen before. It was not his usual work computer. Curiosity warred with her sense of guilt, and curiosity won. She opened it. It was not password protected. What she found on the desktop stole the air from her lungs. It was a folder simply labelled Projects. Inside were dozens of subfolders. Each folder was named with a single first name and a city. There was Anja Berlin, Chloe Paris, Sophia, Rome, and at the very bottom, a folder that made her blood run cold, Imani, Northwood. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She clicked on her own folder. It was a meticulous record of their relationship. There were transcripts of their text messages, recordings of their phone calls, and a detailed psychological profile that described her vulnerabilities in cold analytical language. Subject is financially insecure, emotionally isolated, and possesses a strong empathy complex. Highly susceptible to flattery and mentorship narratives. Primary leverage, gratitude, and manufactured obligation. She was not a protégé. She was a project, a subject. With a growing sense of dread, she clicked on another folder. Anja, Berlin. It contained a similar profile of a young German student. It detailed a grooming process almost identical to her own. The chance encounter, the mentorship, the gifts, the isolation. But this folder had something hers did not, a final entry. It was a PDF document, a forged suicide note, and a link to a German news article from 6 months prior. The article reported the tragic death of a university student named Anja Schmidt, who had reportedly taken her own life in her apartment. The cause of death was listed as an overdose of prescription medication. She clicked on Chloe Toit Paris. The same pattern, a psychological profile, a record of manipulation, and a final entry detailing a staged accidental overdose. Chloe, a young artist, had been found dead 2 years earlier. The police had ruled it a tragic accident. One by one, she opened the folders. Each one told the same horrific story of a young, vulnerable woman, lured in, isolated, controlled, and ultimately eliminated. The scope of it was unimaginable. This was not the work of a single disturbed man. This was a system, a repeatable, refinable process of human exploitation. She scrolled through encrypted financial records on the laptop, seeing massive payments transferred after each woman's death. The names on the transfers were linked to shadowy international corporations. She didn't understand the details, but the implication was clear. Julian was not just a predator. He was an employee, a highly paid, ruthlessly efficient asset disposal specialist. He found vulnerable women, gained control of their lives and assets, perhaps forcing them to sign documents or transfer funds, and then erased them. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was not special. She was next on the list. The beautiful apartment was not a home. It was a holding cell. The expensive gifts were not investments. They were chains. Her meticulously managed life was being prepared for a clean and tidy conclusion. Panic seized her. Her first instinct was to run. Grab her purse and get out of the building. Go to the police. Go anywhere. But then she looked around the apartment. Her new phone, the one he had given her, was on the counter. He was tracking her. Her new laptop, another gift, sat on the desk. Was it also compromised? The clothes in the closet, the food in the fridge, everything in her life was from him. She was completely, utterly entangled. She forced herself to breathe, to think. She was a journalist in training. She needed evidence. She grabbed a small USB drive from her backpack and began frantically copying the contents of the projects folder. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely guide the mouse. Every sound from the hallway made her jump, her heart leaping into her throat. What if he came back early? The file transfer felt like an eternity. When it was finally complete, she ejected the drive, slipped the laptop back into the briefcase, and snapped it shut. She hid the small USB drive in the lining of her oldest pair of sneakers, the ones she'd brought from home, the only thing in the apartment that was truly hers. Now she had to make a decision, a fateful decision. Should she try to make a run for it, knowing he was likely monitoring her every move? Or should she confront him? The idea of a confrontation was terrifying, but the thought of running and being caught was worse. Maybe, just maybe, if she confronted him, she could reason with him, buy herself time, find a way out. It was a desperate, flawed piece of logic, born of sheer terror. It was a decision that would cost her her life. She sent him a text message. Her fingers felt numb and clumsy as she typed, "We need to talk. Can you come over?" The reply came back almost instantly. "Of course. Is everything all right? I'll be there in 20 minutes." The casual warmth of his message was more chilling than any threat. The next 20 minutes were the longest of her life. She paced the polished hardwood floors of her cage, her mind racing. She tried to formulate a plan, a strategy. She would tell him she knew. She would tell him she had copied the files and sent them to a friend. She would try to leverage the evidence for her own safety. When the doorbell rang, the sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent apartment. She took a deep breath and opened the door. Julian stood there, his face a mask of gentle concern. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room, instantly noting the briefcase sitting exactly where he'd left it. He smiled his disarming smile. He asked her what was wrong, his voice laced with the feigned empathy he had perfected. This was the moment. She looked him directly in the eye, her voice trembling but clear. She said, "I know who you are. I know about the other girls, Anya, Chloe." For a fraction of a second his mask faltered. A flicker of something cold and utterly devoid of emotion passed through his eyes. It was the briefest of glimpses into the abyss behind the persona, but then it was gone, replaced by a look of profound confusion and hurt. The charm dropped away completely. The warmth evaporated, leaving behind chilling emptiness. His voice, when he spoke, was flat, devoid of all its previous character. He said simply, "You should not have done that, Imani." It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact, a diagnosis of a fatal error. The situation escalated with terrifying speed. He took a step toward her, and she backed away, her heart pounding. The predator she had read about in the files was now standing in front of her. This was not the charming mentor. This was a killer. She realized her catastrophic mistake. There was no reasoning with him. There was no leverage. Her knowledge had not made her powerful. It had made her a liability that had to be immediately neutralized. She turned and ran for the door, but he was impossibly fast. He grabbed her, his grip like steel. The strength in his hands was shocking, a brutal contradiction to his sophisticated persona. She screamed, but he clamped a hand over her mouth, muffling the sound. He dragged her away from the door, back into the center of the living room. His eyes were cold and analytical, like a scientist observing a specimen. He wasn't enraged, he was merely efficient. He told her in that same dead voice that this was a shame. She had been, he said, one of his most promising projects. He spoke as if discussing a failed investment. In his other hand, he held a small, discreet syringe. He had come prepared. He had likely seen her text as a sign of trouble, a deviation from the plan, and had brought the contingency. He explained in a calm, almost pedagogical tone that it would be painless, a simple injection, a combination of a fast-acting sedative and a potassium chloride solution. It would look like a sudden cardiac event. Tragic, but not suspicious. A young, stressed university student. It was a clean narrative. Terror gave her a final surge of strength. She fought back, kicking and struggling, but she was no match for his cold, practiced violence. The final moments of her life were not spent in the beautiful apartment that had been her prison, but in a blur of pain, fear, and the horrifying realization that her dream had become a meticulously orchestrated nightmare. He was a professional. The act was quick, silent, and brutally effective. He staged the scene with the same meticulous care he applied to everything. He placed her on the sofa, arranging her limbs in a position of repose. He left a half-finished cup of tea on the table beside her. He wiped down every surface he had touched, retrieved his briefcase, and let himself out of the apartment, the lock clicking softly behind him. Imani Williams, a bright star of a girl with a future full of promise, was gone. She was never seen alive again. When the police first entered apartment 4B, the scene appeared exactly as Julian had intended, a peaceful, if tragic, death. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of forced entry. The initial assessment from the medical examiner on the scene suggested a possible aneurysm or undetected heart condition. It was sad, but it did not immediately scream homicide. The investigation was assigned to Detective Miles Corbin, a 20-year veteran of the force with a reputation for being methodical and deeply cynical. Corbin had seen too many things to believe in simple stories. As he walked through the pristine apartment, something felt wrong. It was too neat, too perfect. It felt less like a home and more like a stage set. His first clue was Imani's old cell phone, the one she'd had before Julian gave her the new one. The police found it tucked away in a drawer. On it, they found the concerned text messages from her friend Keisha, questioning the mysterious benefactor who had given Imani the apartment. This was the first time law enforcement had heard the name Julian, but the name didn't exist in any official records. Julian Croft was a ghost. The second inconsistency was the rent. The building manager confirmed that the apartment was owned by a shell corporation based overseas. The rent was paid electronically, always on time, from an untraceable account. There was no rental agreement in Imani's name, no paper trail connecting her to the residence in any official capacity. She had been living completely off the grid. Corbin ordered a more thorough forensic analysis. The autopsy report came back with a finding that shattered the initial theory of natural causes. The medical examiner found a microscopic puncture mark on Imani's neck, almost invisible to the naked eye. More importantly, toxicology reports revealed lethal levels of potassium chloride in her bloodstream, a substance that stops the heart but is notoriously difficult to detect unless you're specifically looking for it. The case was now officially a homicide. The investigation stalled for weeks. They had a cause of death but no suspect. The man known as Julian Croft had vanished. The shell corporation that owned the apartment was a dead end, a labyrinth of international holding companies. It seemed the perfect crime, executed by a phantom. The break in the case came from an unexpected place. It came from a single, overlooked detail. As the forensic team did a final sweep of the apartment before releasing it, a junior officer was tasked with bagging Imani's personal effects. He picked up an old, worn-out pair of sneakers from the bottom of the closet. He noticed a slight bulge in the fabric lining. Following protocol, he slit the lining open. Inside, he found the tiny USB drive. When Detective Corbin plugged the drive into his computer at the precinct, the full horrifying scope of the operation was laid bare. He saw the folders. He saw the names, the cities, the cold psychological profiles. He saw the forged suicide notes and the news clippings. He saw the pattern of predation stretching back years across multiple continents. The man they knew as Julian Croft was not his real name. Cross-referencing the financial data on the drive with international law, enforcement databases, Interpol finally identified him. His real name was Thomas Schreiber, a former intelligence officer from East Germany, trained in psychological operations and covert action. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, he had repurposed his unique and terrifying skills for the private sector, becoming a specialist for a shadowy network that catered to the ultra-wealthy. His job was to silence inconvenient people, mistresses, business rivals, whistleblowers, by systematically and deniably erasing them from existence. A forensic psychologist, Dr. Alana Vance, was brought in to analyze the files. She explained Schreiber's methodology to the stunned investigators. She said he was a classic sociopath, but with a level of discipline and patience that was rare. He didn't kill for pleasure, he killed for profit. His process was a textbook example of ideological grooming. He identified a target's core need for love, for security, for purpose, and then became the sole provider of that need, creating a state of total dependency before the final, transactional act. She explained that his choice of a homeless persona was a brilliant psychological test. It filtered for victims with high levels of empathy, the very people who are least likely to be suspicious of someone offering kindness and most likely to feel a deep sense of obligation when that kindness was returned tenfold. He was, she concluded, one of the most dangerous predators she had ever profiled, a man who had turned the best parts of human nature into weapons against his victims. An international manhunt was launched. Thomas Schreiber was finally apprehended 6 months later in Zurich, where he was in the early stages of grooming his next victim, a young refugee student. The evidence from Imani's USB drive was ironclad. He was extradited to the United States to stand trial. The trial was a media sensation, revealing a dark underworld of corporate espionage and lethal solutions. Schreiber remained cold and emotionless throughout the proceedings. He was found guilty of the murders of Imani Williams and 3 other women within United States jurisdiction. He was sentenced to multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. Investigations into the other cases across Europe are still ongoing. The case of Imani Williams had a profound impact. It led to the development of new police protocols for investigating seemingly non-suspicious deaths of young women. It triggered a public conversation about the dangers of sophisticated psychological manipulation in an increasingly isolated digital age. Her university established a scholarship in her name, the Imani Williams Grant for Investigative Journalism, ensuring that her dream of giving a voice to the voiceless would live on. Imani's story serves as a devastating and vital cautionary tale. It is a reminder that the most dangerous monsters are rarely the ones who leap from the shadows. They are the ones who walk in the light, who speak our language of hopes and dreams, who offer us the world with one hand while holding a syringe in the other. Her tragedy underscores a terrible truth about modern vulnerability, that in a world where so many people feel lonely and unseen, the simple, seductive promise of being understood can be the most effective poison of all. This narrative, while fictional, is based on the real patterns of crime and the chilling methodologies employed by predators who exploit the very fabric of human trust.